Does anybody know what happens when you sprint? From a neuromuscular synchronization standpoint, from a dynamic muscle activity standpoint, from a coordination standpoint, is the most intensive and taxing to the human body. 5 times ground reaction forces, 7 times musculoskeletal forces every time you sprint. You have to account for sprinting. Sprinting will make you stronger and drive up weight. So even during camp, my skill guys don't squat. We don't squat at all. They're not allowed to lift before practice, they lift after. Why don't we squat? Well, think about this. Their hamstrings are already getting destroyed during high intensive practice, does it not? You have to account for every load. I love people who tell me, yeah, I read all of Charlie Francis stuff, I do Charlie Francis program. But then you write a book, and I'm talking about one of these internet gurus who says you have to do a hip dominant movement on one day and the next day do a knee dominant movement, but you don't take into account the fact that you're teaching acceleration training. Does anybody know what happens when you sprint? From a neuromuscular synchronization standpoint, from a dynamic muscle activity standpoint, from a coordination standpoint, is the most intensive and taxing to the human body. 5 times ground reaction forces, 7 times musculoskeletal forces every time you sprint. You have to account for sprinting. Sprinting will make you stronger and drive up weights. Weights does not necessarily drive up sprinting or speed. If that was true, every 1,000-pound squat would be running 4 240s. But they don't, do they? So we eliminated all squatting for our skill guys during camp. Too much stress on the hamstrings. Hamstrings are already getting destroyed with a high volume spike in acute loading from on-field activity. Acceleration is deceleration. That's our sport. Sport of football is a game of constant acceleration and deceleration. You're not going to obtain max velocity in a football field. It's impossible. Why is it impossible? Number one, you're wearing equipment. So it changes the whole dynamics. Number two, you're not in a lane running 60 or 100 meters straight ahead unabated without having to process any information. We have to avoid people. We have to overcome people. Did you ever see a gunner run down the field? A gunner doesn't run straight down the field to cover a punt. He takes a path like this because there's 2 guys on him beating the piss out of him. And when you get the gunner to the sideline, it now becomes a WWE event. Punch, kick, hold, pull face mask, and the officials aren't paying attention. Ask Gui or Evan about standing on a sideline NFL game when the gunner gets pushed into the sideline. They're getting their face mask pulled. They're getting raped. They're literally getting mugged. But they don't run a straight line unabated. They're running trying to avoid people. So we achieve, according to Ralph Mann and Charlie, probably about 84% to 85% of max velocity. Chris, where are you at? Am I not right? Yeah. Thank you. There's an expert. He's not a guru, he's a fucking expert. Anyway, as I said, I just don't read about strength and conditioning or speed. I read about the systems of the body, because no system in the human body works independent of the other systems. You're an interdependent matrix system. You're a systems of systems that has its own checks and balances, which I'll get to. So I've started to read more about the brain. Everything begins in the brain. Your brain is plastic its entire life. We used to think at a certain age the brain became very hardwired. If you ever read the book, The Brain Always Wins, you don't even have to read the book. You can go onto the website. There's a 12 series podcast where you can hear Chris Parker, who's one of the authors who wrote the book, talk about the brain and how they started to develop, how they wrote the book. Some interesting facts about the brain. When the brain researchers began to unlock new mechanisms, neuroplasticity and brain circuitry, everything changed for us in the training world. Understand this, what used to be about sets and reps, so the old days of just throwing weight on a bar and trying to push up numbers are over. Get used to it. It's no longer important. Strength can correct a lot of things. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that strength is a valuable biomotor ability for an athlete. But there are so many different things that an athlete has to account for that you have to account for in training and preparing your athletes. I don't look at preparing my athletes for the season. Ask Gui, ask Gadango, who trains Chris Hogan and some other guys in the NFL. It's about preparing them for the rigors of camp. Because you go from a chronic load, which is stable, to an acute load, which is a tremendous spike. Once that acute load achieves 50% or more of the chronic load, you're in a no man's land. That's where most injuries are going to occur. That's camp. The world that I live in, the world that Evan lives in, the world that Aaron lives in, the world that Uwe lives in is this. At the end of the season, till the 3rd week of April, we're in a dead zone. You can't touch them. They can come in and use the weight room. I got 25 guys in right now who are training. We can only supervise them. We send home a voluntary program that has to say for your voluntary use only. You cannot be on the field with them, running with them. So now our jobs are dependent upon the personal terrorists of this country. Now, if you're a Gadango, if you're Chris, if you're my buddy Randy Scotes down in Miami, or Pete Palmerito, or Ryan Flaherty, or some of these other people who I trust, you understand the importance of a GPP phase. It drives me nuts when I go on the internet and see one of my athletes in February doing change of direction stuff. Why are you doing that? You haven't reestablished the proper biomotor abilities and mechanics of proper acceleration. You haven't exposed the tissue to high velocity training. You have not done a GPP phase or gone through an entire month of aerobic capacity. You want to learn something about the bioenergetic demands of sports? You want to understand the body's energy systems and how they relate to each other? Read Joel Jamieson's book on MMA conditioning. Best book I've read it twice. Just like I've read Super Training 3 times. I've read James Smith's Applied Sprint Training twice. I read things over and over again because I'm not one of those guys who can just read something and say, got it. I'm one of those guys who, after so long, has to pull it up. I surrender. I'm done. I can't handle no more knowledge. Anthony Paroli is my director of sports science. He's fucking OCD as they come. He follows me around like a shadow, like this all day long, all day long. Eventually, I got to do this. When the hand goes up, I'm done. I've had enough information. You have to give me time to comprehend and think about what you just told me. Same thing when I talk to Gadango. I'll say, I'm done. You hit me with too much. That's all I can handle. I went to see Bondarchuk speak. I had to leave halfway through it. I'm like, fuck. I got to leave. Information overload. You can only handle so much, and then I got to come back and think about it. But the brain has changed everything, because now how the brain interprets and post-stimulus and what response or how fast the brain can recover between bouts of stress. Here's what's important. Stress is trauma to the brain. When you present trauma to the brain, it's either a big T or it's a little t. And that's different for everybody in this room. The only thing the brain is concerned about is how much time do I have to recover and rest between bouts of stress. If you don't give the brain enough time, you could actually destroy gray matter or the tissue of the brain. And there's a difference between the brain and the mind, which I'll get into in a second here. But this includes the human body now being understood as different. Now the human body, we're starting to understand, we used to think all stress was stress. The stress of life, the stress of job, the stress of travel, the stress of work, the stress of training. It was all cumulative. Now researchers are starting to understand the brain is starting to differentiate between whether the body lifted weights, went for a jog, or did repetitive sprint bouts, because your response is going to be different. Stress is trauma to the brain. Individual response on a stressor being large or small. Like I said, capital T or small t. The only thing the brain is concerned with is how much rest do I get? And this is all related to resiliency of the brain. We talk about developing resiliency of tissue, right? We talk about developing durability of our athletes. But nobody ever mentions the durability of the resiliency of where it all begins. The brain is the governor. It controls everything. Yet we don't spend as much time thinking about the brain in training as we do about training. It's the same thing about training. We all do a warm-up, and I'm the king of warm-ups. Ask anybody that's ever worked for me. I overdo the warm-ups. I get ridiculous with the warm-ups, but I'd rather spend more time warming up and prep and putting things in place so it's done properly than actually training, if that makes sense. So we're going to warm up to train. We're not going to train to warm up. We're going to go through a very general warm-up before we get to specific. So if we're lifting weights, that doesn't mean we just run down on a weight room floor and start bench pressing. That's specific. You've done nothing to warm up the body general. When I do a warm-up for an acceleration or speed day, and we're probably one of the only teams in the NFL that actually do true speed and acceleration work, and it's programmed differently by position, so the volume of work is different for every position. The volume of work is also different for our older guys as compared to our younger guys. You think I could do the volume of work for Carson Palmer that I do for a young guy like Zach Dysert? You got to be insane. You can't do that. He's 37 years old. Next week, I fly to Sun Valley, Idaho to spend a week with Carson to make sure the people that have come to train him that he's brought in have put everything, so I have to make sure everything's put in place according to what Carson can handle. Because I know Carson better than Carson knows himself now. My job is just to protect Carson from Carson because he's a true warrior. He will overtrain himself to death. He'll just keep going and going until I say, you're done. You're done. Get out. So you have to understand the role of the brain and how it responds to the stressors needs to be taken into account. The brain knows stress is coming. The brain is always 45 to 60 seconds ahead of time in everything we do. It's always constantly assessing and filtering information. Constant relationship with environment, predicting whether it's safe or not. Like I said before, it's our true governor. How much rest adaptation has brain recovered from before the next challenge? Anybody ever hear the unconscious thought theory? If you have a problem, how come only one guy's shaking his head up here? The guy looks like Jesus in blonde hair. You're more stoked than Jesus was, though. But you can't do what he did. You may think you can with your athletes, but you fucking can't. If you're presented with a problem during the week and you try to solve it and you get away from that problem during the weekend, the brain is still actively working on that problem, even though you're not. That's why you come back Monday and think, oh, I got an idea. I come back after every weekend when I'm away from work and I sit down with Anthony and say, you know, I thought about this. Or Michael called me on a Monday morning and say, what do you think about this? And when he's in his OCD phase, Gadango, that's a 45-minute conversation, at least. Going over things and why I think they work and why they don't. He'll present his case, why I think they did and why they don't. It's not an argument. It's just two guys sharing information about how to better our athletes and what's best for our athletes. How does he apply it to his environment? How do I apply it to my environment? One of my DBs, Justin Bethel, is going to New Jersey. First thing I told him, I said, go to Gadango's place. Because I know you'll be taken care of and trained properly. You won't be doing change of direction stuff. You won't be put into a lactic phase. You won't be pushing a weighted sled for 50 yards when in fact, as a lineman, you need to only push it 5 yards. Why do you need to go 50? How about pushing 5, rest 30 seconds, push 5, rest 30 seconds, push 5. There's the bioenergetic bands of sport. Not pushing at 50 yards, so you're coming out of your shoes and in your bare feet, your nuts are hanging on your ground, your tongue's hanging on the ground. That's not it. That's not what you have to do. The unconscious, so it's always continue to solve problems even when you're not actually thinking about it. Problems you mapped out earlier in the week are now solved. How many people have ever heard the cocktail party theory? I know you have, Jesus. I could be talking to Jesus, and we're carrying on a conversation. I apologize. And this gentleman next to him, I could deem he's having a more insightful, important or more engaging conversation. I can still maintain talking with him, but now I'm listening to what he says. Because your brain filters information all day long. And it's specific to you. If your brain didn't filter all that information, did you ever see that guy shakes his head real fast, his head explode? That'd be all of us on a daily basis. And there are some of us like that. But the brain is always constantly filtering the information. So it's constantly filtering information from the environment. So when you train an athlete, you have to take that into account. Where are they mentally? How are they perceiving the workout? Their bodies will tell you. Brain functions for our survival. There's the brain and the mind. The brain works in the background, controlling quality of life, health, performance, sampling everything. The mind is what you're thinking about, gets information on the status, the readiness, the sleep, the hydration, and nutrition. Readiness is obviously defined as the maximum amount of stress the body can handle at any one given point in time, and that's going to fluctuate on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minutely basis. We take heart rate variability, it just gives us a number. I can change somebody who's very sympathetic dominant to very parasympathetic just by doing simple breathing stuff or taking them through a very slow, active dynamic circulatory response and change their heart rate variability. But again, it just gives us a number which to look at. So it's an indicator for us. And it indicates this, we have to do that. Uniqueness of the brain is its ability to evolve and adapt. The brain is always very protective of its energy. It uses 30-60% of the calories that we use by the brain. The Brain Always Wins by John Sullivan and Chris Parker. I suggest everybody get it. It's a great book. Or if you don't feel like reading, again, go to the podcast. You can go to their website, and it's actually called The Brain That Wins, and they will, okay, back. Hold on here, people, because I'm having fits with technology again. This is why I don't believe in technology. How many people have a phone? Everybody got an iPhone, right? All right, somebody got to help me out here. Alicia, where you at? Because this ain't working. I'm trying to go back, and it won't go back. Anyway, how many people ever go to the iStore? If technology is so great, why is the fucking iStore always packed? Did you ever notice that? There's 8 million people. You got to take a number, and your number's like 6 million. If your technology is so good, you geeks, one more. Why am I in this store? Technology is not perfect. It has just made life easier for us, which has complicated things more. I got to go one more past that. There you go, Alicia. Fix this fucking thing. We got an AV guy?
Yeah, this is not. Give me a second. I'm actually working out.
Who, you got one, Jen?
Yeah, I just need to find the focus for it. Now, where do you want to be? Here?
Right there. Very good. That's my girl. Jen, got it. Anybody ever seen the most energetic person in the world? Stand up, Jen. That young lady got more energy than a newborn. I said this a long time ago, and I'll continue to say this. I put this together after reading James Oschman's book on energy medicine, therapeutic healing. Anybody ever read that? Another great book. So's The Body Electric, another great book. You notice I always read, and I hate to read. Reading for me at my age is a precursor for a nap. So one page, and it's a 20-minute nap. James Oschman actually taught at the University of Pittsburgh for a while, which is where I spent 20 years. So when I read his book, I actually got him to autograph the book for me. This is what I sat down and thought about after reading the book. I said, the human body is nothing more than an interdependent matrix system which communicates with and amongst itself all day long. The electronically charged molecules. Your ever-evolving, fluctuating organism is self-regulating, self-supercompensating. You're nothing more than a bioelectric field that is hell-bent on one function. What's that one function? Survival. What we just talked about with the brain. The brain is always based on one thing, survival. It's your job as coaches to impose stressors on your athletes, but understand this. When you impose a stressor, you have to ask yourself, I warmed them up. Here's an important part of the workout. This is the workout. But am I really paying attention to the back end of the workout? Am I really paying attention to how I recover them? Or are my guys just leaving the weight room or leaving the track or leaving the field? Have I actually done something to bring them back down? We are innate problem solvers. Problem in sport is determining how to solve a motor task. Developing an appropriate motor pattern, sequence of movements arranged in time and space. Again, one commonality amongst all athletes is movement. I don't care how strong you get. Strength is just one piece of the policy, the puzzle. Can you move? All movement begins in the brain. If you want to get the brain's attention, you got to slow things down. Slow to fast, simple to complex, easy to hard. If you remember that, you can't go wrong in training your athletes. If you remember that I have to have a foundation of work capacity, and as Charlie Francis has said, your GPP work can go anywhere from, I believe, 2 to 3 weeks to 10 weeks, and it has to be revisited. For an elite athlete whose season just ends in track, that can be 1 week. For my guys who are in their dead zone now, that's a 4-week process. Because the whole month of January, if we have not made the playoffs, which unfortunately we did not this year, we have to account for them not doing anything. And then what happens, like I said before, is after this dead zone, we come back for our off-season program. We get 2 weeks to prepare our athletes for an off-season program. You're allowed in the building for 4 hours, 2 hours with a strength and conditioning coach, Monday to Thursday. I don't know whoever came up with the idea of giving an elite athlete 3 straight days off. That's the worst thing you can do for them, especially from an immune system response. But the CBA dictates our world. We have to learn, where's Aaron? We have to learn how to operate in the CBA in our world. And I don't know anybody, do you know anybody compare an athlete for high volume of work in 2 weeks? Do you know anybody can do that? But we have to. That's why I say we have to rely on the many, many personal terrorists out there who try to distinguish themselves from everybody else to make a buck. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that. Worst thing I ever did in my life, I'm going to go back to the Buffalo story, so bear with me here. My wife goes, let's open a training center in Buffalo. I'm like, I don't know about that. She goes, no, my son Fred's there. You and Fred will make a killing. So here's a comment from Larry Fitzgerald, a future Hall of Famer. Buddy, I don't care how good a trainer you are. I'm not going to Buffalo to train. I should have told my wife, but I said, yeah, okay, we'll do this because you're not listening to me, so I'm going to prove you wrong. After 1 year, went broke, lost everything. So much for fucking proving it wrong. It's the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. It didn't work. Now, her son's still there, and he does some of it. But the point is there's not many facilities out there who understand the GPP phase or understand the proper training of our athletes, so we rely on those personal terrorists to do that. What else was I going to say about Buffalo, Evan? Help me out here. Gadanga, what was I talking about? Because I lost my place. Never mind, your fucking OCD mind is kicked in. Okay, here we go. Failure to plan is planning to fail. Here's what they don't tell you in small print. Nothing goes according to plan. Your plan, you should be a plan B guy and then sometimes a plan C guy based on what your athletes display to you when they warm up. If it's written on paper and you're doing it, you might be a dumbass strength coach. Just because it's written on paper does not mean it's to be done for that day. Great strength coaches are very flexible. Great thing about Dan Paff. Great thing about the late Charlie Francis. Great thing about Boosh Schnecksteiner. Great thing about now Trevor's learning it. Great thing about Gadanga. Great thing about Nate. They understand that things are going to fluctuate. They understand that, you know what, I may have to change because my guys aren't handling this very good. You ask Roger Kingdom, who is my assistant, and Anthony, we'll be in the middle of a workout and I'll change stuff because I don't like what I'm seeing. I'm like, that's it, we're done. They go, why? I says, because I don't like what I'm seeing. It's horrendous. So obviously they're not ready, or obviously I fucked something up. Don't ever tell me that you've never fucked something up. Don't ever say that to me, because you're a straight liar. We've all made mistakes. Every one of us has made mistakes in physical preparation or training our athletes. The problem is admitting it and going on and correcting it. If you can do that, you're going to become a great coach. If you can't admit that, I feel bad for you. Joel Jamieson, like I said, is one of the smartest guys I ever met with biogenetic demands. The body's a system of systems that has its own checks and balances. Here's an example from Joel. When you overtrain, chronic inflammation communicates to your body that you're under a tremendous amount of stress. The body, in turn, causes the brain, or the brain causes itself to decrease your motivation to train. How many people have been through that? Try trashing yourself for a month and see after a month if you really feel like going back and training. I don't care how dedicated you are. Your brain will say, I don't know if I'm ready for this again. The chronic inflammation also suppresses heart rate variability, increases the risk of stroke, cardiovascular disease, speeds up the aging process. When you look closely, everything in the human body is related. If you understand that, you'll understand training. And trust me, nobody in this room is ever going to figure it out. Charlie Francis is one of the very few men I've ever met in 38 years of coaching who had it figured out, pretty close to figured it out. As Joe has said, most of the breakthroughs I've made over my past few years have not been through studying fitness, but rather applying what I've learned from outside fields to what I know about training. Like I said, don't always read about what you're comfortable about reading, strength training. Don't always read about what you're comfortable about reading, speed. Don't always read about what you're comfortable about reading about. Go outside your comfort zone and learn about the body's systems and how they work together. Here it is, face the fact, you will never have it all figured out. There is way too much to know about the intricate workings of the human body and a particular response to training. Things we thought we knew years ago may be groundless or inaccurate now. Never ask an orthopedic surgeon how surgery went the day following surgery. Because here's what you're going to get. It went great, tremendous, no issues. Wait about 4 weeks. Then go back and ask the same surgeon, how'd surgery go? And you're going to get this. Well, you know, when we got in there, we saw this. things change. So nothing is ever as it appears. So next time you have surgery, ask your surgeon. Don't ask him a day after, because he's going to tell you everything went great. Wait about 4 weeks. Then start talking to him and see what starts to display itself. If your programs don't change, you simply aren't learning. Your program is a living, breathing organism, ever adapting, evolving, changing, and adapting. I've said this for a long time. Your program is like you. It's a living, breathing organism. If you're not learning, you're not becoming a better strength coach or stress manager, as I refer to it as. Take what you learn and ask, how does this change what I already know and believe? I had an epiphany in 1997. Is Dave here? Or is Dave still in bed? There's Dave. We convinced Louis to come to the University of Pittsburgh. Dave came with him. For 4 straight hours, I got my ass ripped. You're dumb. This doesn't work. Western periodization is old, outdated, and antiquated. Why are you doing this? Now, at that point in time, I could ask myself, you know what? He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a powerlifter. He knows this sport. I'm not going to do it. Or I could look at myself in the mirror and said, you know what? Guy's right. I need to start learning. I need to start reading. So I asked Louis to send me every article he'd ever written. At that time, Louis was doing 5-week pendulum waves. Remember that, Dave? One question I always asked Louis, if you had to do all over, what would you do different? He said, I would change from a 5 to a 3-week pendulum wave. I went through 4 hours of abuse. The funny thing was, is when they left, Dave pats me on the back and says, don't worry about it, he likes you. I'm like, fuck. What's he going to do if he doesn't like me? My first visit to Westside, which was about a month later, was an eye-opening experience. You don't understand true strength until you visit Westside. And you don't train Westside. The only people that train Westside are the people that are at Westside. You may use their methodologies, and I do use their methodologies, but those methodologies are applied to my sport. I can't max effort my guys all the time. Number one, they don't have the basis or foundation because I don't get them that much. Number two, my max effort work is done every Sunday for 20 weeks straight if we make it to a Super Bowl. Ask yourself this. How many people in here compete in powerlifting, Olympic lifting, or bodybuilding? Can you compete for 20 straight weeks at the most intensive level against the best in the world? I used to bodybuild. I retired at age 52. I did 3 shows in 4 weeks. I thought I was going to die. Now I'm going to brag because I won 2 of those 3 at the age of 51. Next time I'm going to start showing pictures of myself up here. But Dave said I couldn't. But ask yourself that question. But that's what we ask our athletes to do in the NFL. Every Sunday's max effort. They're not recovered. I got news for you. They're not recovered by Wednesday. By Thursday, you start to see some signs of recovery and prep. So our job in the NFL is how can we help our guys recover between intense bouts of activity. So the majority of my work is, guess what? Sub-maximal. You can't train maximally in season. Even out of season, only 10% of my volume in a month is maximal effort work. When my sprint work or acceleration work goes up, what has to come down? My weight work. Things that are alike in nature compete for the same CNS resources. Fatigue, or a hit to the CNS from anywhere is a hit to the CNS everywhere. Fatigue from anywhere is a fatigue from everywhere. You have to take that into account, especially when our volume of speed work gets so high as we prepare guys for on-field activity. You can't go in a weight room and try and kill them. Now, I didn't say you can't go more intense. There's a difference between intensity and volume. Your volume of work has to do what? Drop drastically. That's what's so ingenious about Charlie Francis's vertical integration concept. All components that are inherently involved in developing a power speed athlete are addressed all year long. A thread of each is constantly maintained. So what is being emphasized, the others are being maintained. So if your speed work is here, my weight work got to come down. So is my plyometric work. Is why? Sprinting is plyometric in nature, is it not? Is it not taking advantage of a stretch shortening cycle? How much force can I apply into the ground? If you want to make people run faster, apply more mass-specific force in the proper biomechanical positions in ever-decreasing increments of time, and they'll run faster. But understand this, the maximum output you have is what you have for life. You don't expand upon that. What you expand upon is the usable amount of that maximal output through training. Nobody taps into maximal output unless you're that mother that sees her kid under a car. That's maximal output. Nobody ever taps into that. We don't even come close. But what we do use is we do develop a more usable amount through training if training is done properly. Remember I talked about those windows of opportunity. There's a guy that developed some of the best sprinters in high school in the world. But he understands training. He understands those windows of opportunity. So for females, I believe it's from 6 to 8 and 11 to 13. For males, 7 to 9, 13 to 16 are windows of opportunity for speed and power enhancement, which is perfect for what Chris does because that's what he's dealing with, high school athletes. By the time they turn 22, your elastic reactive response, that's what you got. It's not going to get any better. There's very, very few Usain Bolts. You ever notice sprinters, either tall, lean, and elastic, or short, stocky, and strong? Mo Green has been in my facility. Mo Green is short, stocky, and strong. So is Harvey Glantz. Both of them have visited me. Usain Bolt is long, lean, and elastic. He stores a lot of elastic energy. Here's what's even more funny. Here you go. Jamaica is an island in the middle of the Atlantic, is it not? It's surrounded by what? Fucking water. So if there's waters, there's lots of what? Beaches. What are beaches made of? Sand. When was the last time you seen Usain Bolt sprinting sand? There's an indicator right there, people. Charlie Francis has literally mapped out for everybody the components to develop power speed athletes. Nobody pays attention to it, unless you're me or Gadango or Chris or some other people. Why don't you pay attention? James Smith's book, Applied Sprint Training, is written for you. You don't have to do anything except for take time and read a thing. It's not that hard. Here's my favorite quote. True intelligence is not what you know, but what you do when you don't know. I guarantee somebody's going to ask me a question, or I'm going to say, you know what? Better let me look into that, because I don't know, and I'll be the first to admit it. The only thing that differentiates me from you is the number of years I've been doing this. So like Farmers Insurance, I know a lot because I've seen a lot, which really is untrue because I got to tell my wife, I don't know a lot, but what I know, I know.